Hello and welcome to Action Women. This is the podcast for women ready to unleash their power and take real action towards their goals. I'm your host, Anthea McCourtie. Today, I want to talk to you about self-development. Now, chances are, if you're listening to this, you've read a self-development book or two, or perhaps listened to one or two on audio. But if I were to ask you to think about the last one that you read, could you summarize it to a friend? Could you list the key takeaway points? And could you elaborate on how you've actually applied them to your life? Now, if you're struggling to answer any of those questions, chances are you're not alone. I can certainly testify to struggling with some of those. I'm a huge self-development book fan, and I can certainly say that some of them have absolutely changed the way that I think about things and changed the way I do things. And they've had a real impact on my life. But as somebody who loves them, I tend to devour them. And yes, I struggle if I were to summarize some of the key points in these books. And, I can't say that I've put all the action points that really spoke to me. I can't say I've put them all into practice. And I think it's really easy to actually fall into some common traps with these kind of books. So what I wanted to do today was just to talk to you about some of these common traps, how we can avoid them, and how to actually get the most out of them, because they're such a fantastic resource. This whole genre has just absolutely exploded over the last couple of decades, and especially with podcasts and audiobooks much more widely available. It's an ever expanding field. So I just think that there's so much that we can get out of it if we just think about things maybe slightly differently. And obviously, I'm all about taking action. So I just want to share some really pragmatic tips for you, and hopefully you'll find some of them helpful. So if we think about some of the common traps, some of these may be familiar to you. So if you get really into them, you can go through them really quickly. Now, I will listen to self-development books on audio. One of the ways that I really kind of got into them recently was just by listening to them in the car. I'm mobile in most of my work with clients, and being stuck in traffic, it just helped me feel like I was being more productive with my time. And after listening to one of Rob Moore's audiobooks, I listened to them on 1.5 or even double speed, which really does help. But I do get through them very quickly. And sometimes I think I move through at a pace that's perhaps quicker than the original author designed. And I know some books will actually have a set pace for actions to take place. They might have a week 1, week 2, etc. But I can whiz through those a bit too quickly. On the flip side, you can also go through them too slowly. Now, when I'm reading self-development books, this is something that I tend to fall into as well, because it's rare for me to actually be in the frame of mind or even have the time to actually sit down and read them. I prefer to read fiction just before I go to sleep. So I really do need to be in the mind frame to actually sit down and read a self-development book. And in that case, when you've got that kind of lack of momentum, you can fall out of the sequence of those, and then it can make it hard to follow. And I've got a number of unfinished books on the shelf behind me where that's happened. So my preference is to go for audio. And if you find yourself falling into that trap, maybe that's something to consider. Another area another pitfall that I fall into is actually skipping over a lot of the interactive or the action taking parts. I know Action Women podcast, but actually this is one of the main reasons why I wanted to start this podcast, just to really give people some more accountability, encouraging them to take action. But, especially things like meditation, obviously, if I'm driving in my car and I'm listening, then I can't do it there and then. But instead of saving it and coming back to it, quite often I might forget about it. So that's something that you might find as well. And I think one of the biggest traps that I fall into is getting that sense of getting carried away with the momentum, really feeling what the author is putting across, but actually giving myself a false sense of action. So it's almost like talking the talk without walking the walk. If you ever talk to somebody about your goals and they get hyped up and you get hyped up talking about it, it actually can detract from the action that you take. I find this quite a lot, so I have to be quite careful in how I do things. Even with this podcast, I was talking to people about it for way too long before I actually sat down and did it. So that's definitely something to be aware of. So I'm going to share with you some tips that I have found really helpful, and it's things that I'm putting into practice and that I'm going to put into practice moving forward. So first of all, I would say to find a pace and a time frame that works for you. So maybe the book will set out a time frame for you. So try and follow that if you can. Or if it has things in sections, put your own time frame in place, put your own timetable there. And so that helps you to break things up. And if there's action points, then you can actually schedule them in and just make sure that you do them before you move on to the next section, because the authors put them there for a reason. So really do make the most of that. Now, the other tip that I will give you, which you probably already do, is to bookmark and highlight the sections that really speak to you. So if you're already doing this, and you can do this in audiobooks as well. So I bookmark, and then when I can, I'll go and put a little note on there. But the key thing is to make sure that you go back to them. So one thing that I'm going to be doing moving forward, and it's on the action list for this week, is to actually go back through my most recent self-development books and actually read through those bookmark sections, because there's a reason why you've highlighted it. There's a reason why you've selected that section. So go back and jog your memory, because it's easy to forget these things. So, if you need to, write them out, put them on a post-it, stick them up on your fridge, on your wall, whatever. We've got so much access to different things now. Like, you can go onto Canva, you could make something really creative and print it off, gosh, go nuts, put it on a mug, get it on a coaster, the things that really speak to you, because they are powerful if you've noted them and you've highlighted them. So don't just let those be forgotten, go back to them. And then another tip, so the third on my list, is to actually take time to summarize. So I asked you at the beginning, could you actually summarize the sort of the ethos of the book? Could you summarize the different sections to somebody if they asked? I think this is actually really, really helpful if you can do this for yourself. Now, this may seem a lot like study. So I know quite often people will say you've not really understood something until you can actually explain it to somebody else. And I think that's really relevant. So either write that down yourself or actually talk to somebody about it, summarize it. And if you're struggling, then that's a cue to actually go back, maybe reread, and just make sure that you've got it. And what you'll find is, as you're actually summarizing it to somebody else, more and more things will start to fall into place. And that actually leads me quite nicely onto the next tip that I have for you. So join a community or set up a group. Quite often, especially if it's quite a big author that already has quite a following on social media, maybe they have a Facebook group or some kind of community that's set up, either just in their own forum, or, you know, specifically for that book and the principles of that book. So that will allow you to connect with like-minded people. If you have questions, then you can discuss it with other people, and maybe the author themselves will be able to input and you know, clarify any things that don't quite make sense. You could go a step further. You could actually contact the author, and that will allow them to clarify anything, maybe point you in the right direction in terms of resources. It could even give them inspiration for a follow-up book, or some additional resources. So I definitely recommend trying to join a community, giving yourself that accountability if you want to put things into place. And if there isn't one, why not set one up? You know, if you have a book club, why not do a few self-development books, or why not set up a self-development book club? It could be a really good way to make new connections, as well as just really getting the most out of the material and the resources. So those are my tips, how to avoid some of those common pitfalls. So, you know, if you're reading too quickly, try and give yourself a pace. Try and keep that momentum going so that you're not going too slowly either. Give yourself a timetable so you can actually take those actions that the author has designed for you. Don't get carried away and thinking that you've actually taken the action. Make sure that you do. So my key action points for you to take away: I'm all about taking action. This is the Action Women podcast. So I'm going to suggest to you that you go back to your last one or two self-development books. Go through, if you've not already bookmarked and highlighted sections, go and do that. So you can read through in a less detailed way. If you've already listened to it once, maybe you could skim a little bit more, but do highlight those sections, go back to the bookmarks, write them out if you need to. Summarize the book, summarize the sections, and make sure that you're actually giving yourself the actions to do, and giving yourself some accountability if you can, by joining a group. Contact the author if you have any questions, and yeah, just get the most out of them. So main thing for today: go back to those books, pick up the highlights, the bookmarks, summarize them. Let me know how you get on. I'd love to hear your recommendations. I'd love to know which self-development books have had the biggest impact on you. You know, I'd love to know how they've impacted your life. Please do share your stories. Either contact me directly through social media. I'd love to hear, and maybe, you know, maybe I can share them with the other listeners. So thank you for listening. Take care and take action.